Welcome to Learning English from People.
Ronald Reagan, the man who tore down a wall. How did a Hollywood actor, a man known for playing cowboys and heroes, become one of the most powerful leaders of the 20th century? How did a man who preached the virtues of small government end up tripling the national debt? And how did the fierce Cold Warrior, who called the Soviet Union an evil empire, become the man who helped bring the Cold War to an end? The life of Ronald Reagan is a story of powerful contradictions. He was a man of simple stories and complex consequences, an optimist whose policies reshaped America and the world in ways we still feel today. This is the story of the great communicator, the Teflon president, and the amiable revolutionary. His story begins not in Washington, but in the small towns of the American Midwest. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois. His family life was a study in contrasts. His father, Jack, was a charming shoe salesman with big dreams, but he was always held back by a difficult struggle with alcoholism. This struggle meant the family moved often, and it taught young Ronald a lesson about responsibility and overcoming hardship. The other side of his childhood was his mother, Nell. She was a deeply religious woman who gave her sons a strong moral compass. She taught Reagan the importance of faith, kindness, and optimism. This mix of his father's Irish storytelling charm and his mother's steady faith would become a key part of his personality. Growing up in Dixon, Illinois, Reagan was an active and popular young man. He loved sports and acting. For 7 summers, he worked as a lifeguard on the Rock River, and he was credited with saving 77 lives, a fact he loved to share. At Eureka College, he wasn't a top student, but he was a natural leader. He played football, became student body president, and even led a successful student strike against cuts to the school's programs. It was his first taste of using his voice to persuade people and lead a cause. After college, that voice became his profession. In 1932, he got a job as a radio sports announcer in Iowa. His most famous job was recreating Chicago Cubs baseball games for listeners. He would receive basic updates by wire and use his imagination to describe the action as if he were there. This job was perfect training. It taught him how to tell a compelling story, create a picture with words, and connect with an unseen audience. All of these skills would later define his political career. In 1937, his life took an unexpected turn. On a trip to California, he took a screen test with the Warner Bros. Movie studio. They offered him a contract, and soon Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood actor. For the next 2 decades, he appeared in over 50 films. He was never one of Hollywood's biggest superstars, but he was a reliable leading man, often playing the role of the honest, all-American hero. His most famous role was in the 1940 film Newt Rockne, All-American. He played a dying football player named George Gipp, and his line, "Win one for the Gipper," became his personal nickname. Decades later, it would become a powerful political slogan. Another key role came in the 1942 film King's Row, where his dramatic performance earned him critical praise. When World War II began, Reagan's poor eyesight kept him from fighting overseas. Instead, he served in the Army Air Force's 1st Motion Picture Unit, making training and propaganda films. He spent the war helping the country in the way he knew best, through film. After the war, Reagan's acting career began to slow down. But as one door closed, another opened. He became deeply involved in the politics of Hollywood, specifically in the Screen Actors Guild, or SAG, the Union for Actors. He was elected its president 7 times. This was a difficult period in Hollywood, with intense labor disputes and a growing fear of communism. Reagan became a strong anti-communist. He even testified before Congress about communist influence in the film industry. His time leading SAG was a training ground for his future in politics. He learned how to negotiate, how to fight for his beliefs, and how to lead. His personal life was also changing. His first marriage, to actress Jane Wyman, ended in divorce. In 1952, he married another actress, Nancy Davis. Nancy became his closest advisor, his biggest supporter, and the center of his world. Their partnership was one of the great love stories in American politics. By the mid-1950s, Reagan's film career was fading, so he moved to the new medium of television. He became the host of a popular show called General Electric Theater. But this was more than just an acting job. As a spokesman for GE, he traveled across the country, giving speeches at factories and company events. He spoke about the greatness of American free enterprise and warned against the dangers of too much government control. He had always been a Democrat, even an admirer of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. But his experiences in Hollywood and his work for GE slowly pushed him toward conservatism. He began to see big government not as the solution, but as the problem. His political arrival happened in a single night in 1964. He gave a nationally televised speech for the Republican presidential candidate, Barry Goldwater. The speech was called "A Time for Choosing." In it, Reagan powerfully and clearly explained his conservative ideas. He warned against high taxes, government overreach, and being weak in foreign policy. Goldwater lost the election badly, but Reagan's speech made him an instant star in the conservative movement. 2 years later, in 1966, he ran for governor of California. He presented himself as an outsider, a citizen politician who would fix the problems in the state government. He won a huge victory. As governor for 8 years, he proved he was a serious leader. He balanced the state budget, which required him to pass the largest tax increase in the state's history, which was a practical move that surprised many who heard his anti-tax speeches. He also took a tough stand against student protests at universities like Berkeley. His time as governor showed that he was a man of strong conservative principles, but also a practical politician. After leaving the governor's office, Reagan aimed for the presidency. He tried in 1976, but narrowly lost the Republican nomination to the current president, Gerald Ford. The loss was painful, but it made him the clear leader of the conservative wing of the party. By 1980, America was ready for a change. The country was facing high inflation, unemployment, and an energy crisis. The Iran hostage crisis made America seem weak on the world stage. President Jimmy Carter seemed unable to solve these problems. Ronald Reagan offered a different vision. He was optimistic and confident. He promised to cut taxes, reduce the size of government, and rebuild the military to stand strong against the Soviet Union. In a famous debate with Carter, he turned to the audience and asked a simple, powerful question. "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" For most Americans, The answer was no. On November 4, 1980, Ronald Reagan won the presidency in a landslide. On the day he took office, Reagan declared the core philosophy of his presidency. "In this present crisis," he said, "government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem." This was the first great paradox of his leadership. He was a crusader against big government, yet he would lead one of the most powerful governments in the world. His economic plan, known as Reaganomics, was based on a few simple ideas: big tax cuts, less government regulation on businesses, and controlling the money supply to stop inflation. At first, the economy got worse. In 1982, the country was in a deep recession, and unemployment was high. Critics called his policies trickle-down economics and said they only helped the rich. But Reagan stayed the course. He believed that cutting taxes would encourage people to invest and create jobs. By 1983, he was proven right. The economy began a long and powerful recovery. Inflation fell, and millions of new jobs were created. It was called morning in America. But this success came with a huge cost. While Reagan cut taxes, he also started the largest peacetime military buildup in American history. Cutting taxes while massively increasing spending created a problem: enormous budget deficits. During his 8 years as president, the national debt tripled. The man who had spent his career speaking against government debt added more to it than any president before him. It was a failure he himself later admitted was his greatest disappointment. Just 69 days into his presidency, Reagan's life was almost cut short. On March 30, 1981, he was shot by an assassin outside a hotel in Washington, D.C. The bullet came within an inch of his heart. As he was being wheeled into surgery, he joked with the doctors, "I hope you're all Republicans." His courage and good humor during the crisis made the American people love him even more. He recovered quickly, and many believed, he felt, he had been saved for a purpose. This sense of purpose was clearest in his foreign policy, which presented the second great paradox of his presidency. He was both a fierce cold warrior and a historic peacemaker. When he came into office, Reagan took a tough new stand against the Soviet Union. He rejected the previous policy of détente, which aimed for peaceful coexistence. Instead, he called the Soviet Union an evil empire and a threat to freedom everywhere. He backed up his strong words with action. He poured hundreds of billions of dollars into the military, building new bombers, missiles, and ships. In 1983, he announced a bold and controversial plan called the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. It was a futuristic missile defense system that would use lasers and satellites to shoot down Soviet missiles from space. Critics called it Star Wars and said it was an expensive fantasy, but Reagan believed it could make nuclear weapons useless and change the world. He also supported anti-communist fighters around the globe, in places like Afghanistan and Nicaragua. This was the Reagan Doctrine, a plan to not just contain communism, but to roll it back. In 1983, he sent U.S. troops to invade the small Caribbean island of Grenada to overthrow a new communist government. To his supporters, these actions showed that America was strong again. Riding a wave of economic prosperity and national pride, Reagan was re-elected in 1984 in one of the biggest landslide victories in American history, winning 49 out of 50 states. But his second term brought new challenges, including a scandal that revealed the third great paradox of his leadership: the gap between the great communicator and the detached manager. In 1986, the Iran-Contra affair exploded. The public learned that the Reagan administration had secretly and illegally sold weapons to Iran, a country known for supporting terrorism. The goal was to free American hostages in Lebanon, but the plan failed. To make matters worse, the money from those sales was secretly diverted to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua, even though Congress had directly forbidden it. The scandal was a huge crisis. It raised serious questions about who was truly in control inside the White House. An investigation concluded that Reagan himself did not know about the illegal plan, but it criticized his hands-off management style, which had allowed his staff to break the law. For a president celebrated as a master communicator, this was a moment when he seemed out of touch with his own administration. His image as the Teflon president, a leader to whom no scandal ever seemed to stick, was badly damaged. Despite these struggles at home, the most important story of Reagan's second term was happening on the world stage. In 1985, a new, younger leader named Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. Reagan, the ultimate anti-communist, saw an opportunity. He sensed that Gorbachev was different, and he decided to engage with him. The two leaders met 4 times in a series of historic summits. They developed a surprising and genuine personal connection. At a speech in front of the Berlin Wall in 1987, Reagan delivered one of the most famous lines of his presidency. He challenged the Soviet leader directly, saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Later that year, the two men signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was the first treaty ever to eliminate an entire class of nuclear weapons. The man who had called the Soviet Union an evil empire was now signing peace treaties with its leader. Reagan's policy of peace through strength seemed to have worked. By building up America's military, he had forced the Soviets to the negotiating table. By being willing to talk, he helped start a process that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the end of the Soviet Union itself in 1991. The Cold War was over, and Ronald Reagan had played a central role in its peaceful conclusion. Ronald Reagan left office in 1989 as a very popular president. He retired to his home in California, but a final, cruel challenge awaited him. In 1994, he wrote a brave and moving letter to the American people. He announced that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life," he wrote. With grace and dignity, he slowly faded from public life, cared for by his devoted wife, Nancy. He died on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93. What is the legacy of this complicated man? For his supporters, he is a hero. He rebuilt the economy, restored America's confidence, and won the Cold War. He started a Reagan Revolution that reshaped the Republican Party and American politics for generations, championing lower taxes, less government, and a strong national defense. For his critics, the story is different. They point to the massive national debt, the growing gap between the rich and the poor, and his administration's slow response to the AIDS crisis, and its support for harsh regimes in the name of fighting communism. Perhaps the key to understanding him lies in that first career as an actor and storyteller. More than any political detail, Ronald Reagan understood how to tell America a story about itself. He told a story of a proud, strong, and optimistic nation, a shining city upon a hill. He made people feel good about their country again. He was a man of deep convictions who could also be a practical leader. He was an idealist who changed the real world. In the end, the actor from Illinois played his greatest role on the world stage, leaving behind a legacy as complex and contradictory as the nation he led.